The iron shackles around Catherine Moore's wrists had left purple bruises that matched the twilight sky over Dodge City, Kansas, and as she stood on that wooden platform in the summer heat of 1878, she wondered if this was how her mother had felt before the fever took her, trapped and helpless with no way out. The auctioneer's voice boomed across the crowded town square, drawing curious onlookers and eager men who saw nothing wrong with treating women like livestock. Catherine kept her chin high despite the humiliation burning through her veins. She was 22 years old, an orphan with debts she could never repay, and the bank had sold her contract to a traveling merchant who specialized in mail-order brides. The merchant stood beside the platform, counting his anticipated profits while Catherine's fate hung in the balance. "We've got ourselves a fine specimen here, gentlemen," the auctioneer called out, his tobacco-stained teeth visible through his wide grin. "Young, healthy, can read and write. Starting bid is $300. Catherine's stomach churned. $300. That was what her life was worth to these people. She scanned the crowd, seeing leering faces and calculating eyes. Most of the men looked twice her age. Weathered by hard living and harder drinking, she tried to steady her breathing, tried to prepare herself for whatever came next. 300, called out a rancher she recognized from the general store. He had a reputation for working his ranch hands until they dropped. 350, another voice joined in. Catherine closed her eyes, sending up a silent prayer to whoever might be listening. She had tried everything to avoid this moment. After her mother died 2 years ago, Catherine had taken over the seamstress shop, but her mother's medical bills had buried her in debt. When she could not pay, the bank seized everything. The law in Kansas gave her few rights as an unmarried woman with no family. The merchant had purchased her debt, and with it, the right to auction her off as a bride. $400. The new voice cut through the crowd like a knife through butter, deep and commanding. Catherine's eyes snapped open, searching for the speaker. He stood at the back of the crowd, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a dusty brown hat that shadowed his face. Even from a distance, she could see he was younger than the other bidders, perhaps in his late 20s. $450, the rancher countered, sounding irritated. $600, the stranger said, stepping forward. The crowd parted for him, and Catherine finally got a clear look at her potential buyer. He had sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His jaw was strong and clean-shaven, unusual for the territory where most men wore beards, but it was his eyes that caught her attention. Green as spring grass and steady as stone. The auctioneer's eyebrows shot up. $600. Now that is a serious bid, gentlemen. Do I hear $650? The crowd murmured, but no one spoke up. $600 was more than most cowboys made in a year. The rancher shook his head and stepped back, muttering under his breath. Going once, going twice, sold to the gentleman in the brown hat. Catherine's heart hammered against her ribs as the stranger approached the platform. He pulled a leather pouch from his vest and counted out the money with methodical precision, placing each gold coin in the auctioneer's greedy palm. The merchant who owned her contract grinned widely, already calculating how much profit he had made. "Pleasure doing business," the merchant said, extending his hand. The stranger ignored it. Instead, he turned to Catherine, and for the first time, she saw something unexpected in his expression. It was not lust or ownership or cruel satisfaction. It looked almost like sympathy. "Ma'am," he said quietly, tipping his hat, "my name is James Cordell. I am going to unlock those shackles now." Catherine could not find her voice. She stood frozen as James climbed onto the platform and produced a small key. He must have purchased it from the merchant, along with her contract. His hands were gentle as he unlocked the iron cuffs, and when they fell away, Catherine rubbed her sore wrists, unable to process what was happening. "Come on down from there," James said, offering his hand. She took it because she had no choice, but also because something in his voice made her feel marginally less terrified. His palm was calloused and warm. the hand of a man who worked for his living. He helped her down the platform steps, and the crowd began to disperse, the show over. The merchant approached them, still grinning. "You got yourself a good one there, Cordell. She can sew, cook, all the wifely duties. The contract says nothing," James interrupted, his voice hard as iron. "I bought it, which means I can do whatever I want with it." He reached into his vest again and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Catherine realized it was her contract, the document that had bound her into servitude. James held it up so both she and the merchant could see it clearly. Then he tore it in half. Catherine gasped. The merchant's mouth fell open. "What in the hell do you think you are doing?" "Exactly what it looks like," James said, tearing the contract again and again until it was nothing but scraps. He let the pieces fall to the dusty ground. "Miss Moore, you are free to go. I ask nothing in return." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Catherine stared at him, certain she had misheard. "What?" "You are free," James repeated, meeting her eyes. "You do not owe me anything. Not money, not service, not your hand in marriage. Nothing." "Now hold on just a minute," the merchant sputtered, his face turning red. "That was a legal contract. You cannot just—" "I can, and I did," James said calmly. "The contract belonged to me. I destroyed my own property. No law against that." He turned back to Catherine, and his expression softened. "Do you have anywhere to go? Anyone who can help you?" Catherine's mind reeled. Free. He had just paid $600 and asked for nothing. It made no sense. Men did not do things like this, not in her experience. There had to be a catch, some hidden expectation. "I do not understand," she whispered. "Why would you do this?" James was quiet for a moment, looking down at his boots. When he spoke, his voice was low enough that only she could hear. 5 years ago, my sister was in a situation similar to yours. Different circumstances, but the same outcome. A man bought her contract and worked her to death on his ranch within a year. I was out in Colorado and did not even know until it was too late." He raised his eyes to hers, and Catherine saw old pain there, carefully controlled. "I cannot bring Ellen back, but I could help you. So I did." Tears burned at the back of Catherine's eyes. She had spent 2 years learning to harden herself, to build walls around her heart so the cruelty of the world could not break her. But this simple act of kindness, this incomprehensible generosity, threatened to shatter every defense she had constructed. "I have nowhere to go," she admitted, the words catching in her throat. "No family, no money. The merchant took everything." James considered this, then nodded. "I run a cattle ranch about 10 miles north of here. It is not fancy, but it is respectable. I employ a housekeeper named Mrs. Bennett. She is a good woman, widowed, about 50 years old. She has been asking me to hire help because the ranch has grown and she cannot manage all the housework alone." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I could offer you a job if you want it. Fair wages, your own room, no strings attached. You would work for Mrs. Bennett, not for me. And if you decide you want to leave, you can do so at any time." Catherine searched his face for deception, for the angle, for the trap. She found none of those things. What she found instead was honesty, plain and simple. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she asked. "Because someone should have been kind to Ellen," he said simply. That was when Catherine made her decision. Maybe it was foolish. Maybe she would regret it. But standing in that town square with nowhere else to turn, James Cordell's offer felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. "I accept," she said. "Thank you." A smile crossed his face, brief but genuine. "You do not need to thank me, Miss Moore. Come on, my horse is at the livery. We can get you some supplies before we head out to the ranch." They walked together through Dodge City, and Catherine felt the stares following them. News traveled fast in frontier towns, and by nightfall everyone would know about the cowboy who bought a mail-order bride and set her free. James seemed unbothered by the attention. He walked with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin. At the general store, he purchased a canvas bag and began filling it with supplies. "You will need proper clothes for ranch work," he said. selecting sturdy cotton dresses and a pair of work boots, and anything else you might want. Books, writing paper, whatever strikes your fancy. Catherine stood awkwardly, unused to someone spending money on her behalf without expecting repayment. This is too much. It is necessary, James corrected. You cannot work in that dress. He gestured to her threadbare gown, the nicest thing she owned and still pitifully worn. Consider it part of your employment. Mrs. Bennet will need you to be properly outfitted. He added more items to the pile. A warm shawl, a hairbrush, lavender soap. Catherine watched him, trying to reconcile this careful consideration with everything she had learned about men. Her father had been a drunk who disappeared when she was 10. Her mother's customers had been kind enough, but they had always kept their distance, aware of her poverty. And the men who had bid on her today had looked at her like an object to be acquired. James Cordell was different, and Catherine did not know what to make of him. They left Dodge City as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the Kansas plains in shades of amber and gold. James rode a bay gelding named Tucker, and he had purchased a gentle mare for Catherine. She was not an experienced rider, but the mare was patient with her inexperience. The land stretched out endlessly in all directions, an ocean of grass beneath a vast sky. Catherine had lived her whole life in Dodge City, and she had forgotten how beautiful the open country could be. The wind carried the scent of sage and wildflowers, and somewhere in the distance a meadowlark sang its evening song. The ranch is called the Double C, James said as they rode. I started it 4 years ago with money I saved from working trail drives. It was hard going at first, but the herd is healthy now, about 200 head of cattle. I have 3 ranch hands, Miguel, who has been with me from the start, his younger brother Carlos, and an older fellow named Dutch, who knows more about horses than anyone I have ever met. Catherine listened, grateful for the conversation. It kept her mind off the surreal turn her life had taken. Mrs. Bennet came on 2 years ago, James continued. Her husband died of pneumonia, and she needed work. She is a little gruff at first, but she has a good heart. I think you will like her. What will my duties be? Catherine asked. Whatever Mrs. Bennet needs, cooking, cleaning, laundry, mending. The work is honest, but it is hard. I will pay you $20 a month plus room and board. $20. Catherine's mother had barely made that much in a good month at the seamstress shop. That is very generous. It is fair, James corrected. You will earn every penny, I promise you that. They rode in comfortable silence for a while. Catherine found herself stealing glances at James, trying to understand him. He sat tall in the saddle, moving with the horse's rhythm like he had been born to it. Everything about him spoke of strength and capability, but there was also a gentleness in the way he handled his horse, the way he had unlocked her shackles. Can I ask you something? She said finally. Of course. Are you married? Engaged? James shook his head. No, ma'am. I have been too busy building the ranch to think much about courting. But surely women must be interested. You are... Catherine trailed off, realizing too late how forward she sounded. James glanced at her, one eyebrow raised, a hint of amusement in his expression. I am what? She felt heat rise to her cheeks. You seem like a good man, and you are clearly successful. I appreciate that, he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice even though she was not looking at him. Truth is, I have not met anyone who made me want to give up my freedom. The ranch takes most of my time and attention. It does not leave much room for romance. Catherine nodded, understanding that sentiment better than he knew. Before the debts, before the auction, she had been too busy trying to survive to think about love or marriage. Romance was a luxury for people with stable lives. The Double C came into view as the last light faded from the sky. It was larger than Catherine had expected, with a sturdy ranch house, a barn, a bunkhouse, and several corrals. Lamplight glowed from the windows, warm and welcoming. As they approached, the front door opened and a woman emerged, wiping her hands on her apron. James Cordell, where have you been? She called out. Supper has been ready for an hour. Sorry, Mrs. Bennet, James said, dismounting. I had business in town. He helped Catherine down from her mare, and the older woman's eyes widened. "And what business would that be?" Mrs. Bennet asked, her tone sharp with suspicion. "This is Miss Catherine Moore," James said. "I have hired her to help you with the housework. Catherine, this is Mrs. Bennet." Mrs. Bennet looked Catherine up and down, taking in her worn dress and the bruises on her wrists. Catherine saw the moment understanding dawned in the older woman's eyes. She had heard about the auction. "Well," Mrs. Bennet said briskly, "you look half-starved and dead on your feet. Come inside, girl. We will get some food in you and figure out the rest tomorrow." Relief flooded through Catherine. She had been prepared for judgment or pity, but Mrs. Bennet offered neither. Just practical kindness, which was exactly what she needed. The ranch house was simple but well-maintained. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room all in one. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, and the smell of beef stew made Catherine's stomach growl. She could not remember the last time she had eaten a full meal. Mrs. Bennet ladled stew into bowls, while James carried Catherine's supplies to a small bedroom off the kitchen. "This was meant to be a storage room, but we cleaned it out last month," Mrs. Bennet explained. "It is not much, but the bed is comfortable, and you will have privacy." "It is perfect," Catherine said, and she meant it. After spending the last 3 weeks sleeping on the floor of a wagon while the merchant transported his human cargo, even a small room felt like a palace. They ate together at the wooden table, and Catherine tried not to wolf down her food despite her hunger. James and Mrs. Bennet talked about ranch business, discussing which pastures needed rotating and whether they should purchase more chickens. It was comfortable domestic conversation, the kind Catherine had not experienced since her mother was alive. After dinner, Mrs. Bennet showed Catherine to her room. It was tiny, barely large enough for the narrow bed and a small dresser, but it had a window with gingham curtains, and someone had placed wildflowers in a jar on the dresser. "I will wake you at dawn," Mrs. Bennet said. "We have much to do, but we will start slow until you get your strength back." She paused at the door, her expression softening. "I do not know what James paid for your freedom, girl, but you should know that he is a good man, one of the best I have ever known. Whatever he told you, he meant it. You are safe here." "Thank you," Catherine whispered. After Mrs. Bennet left, Catherine sat on the bed and finally allowed herself to cry. She wept for everything she had lost, for the terror of the auction, for her mother, for the impossible kindness of a stranger. She cried until she had no tears left, and then she lay down on the soft bed and slept more soundly than she had in months. Dawn came early on the Double C. Catherine woke to the sound of roosters crowing and found a basin of warm water outside her door. She washed quickly, dressed in one of the new work dresses James had purchased, and braided her long brown hair. When she emerged from her room, she found Mrs. Bennet already busy preparing breakfast. "Can you cook?" Mrs. Bennet asked without preamble. "Yes, ma'am, my mother taught me." "Good. Start on the biscuits while I handle the bacon and eggs. The men will be in soon, and they eat enough for a small army." Catherine fell into the rhythm of the work easily. It felt good to have a purpose, to be useful again. She mixed the biscuit dough while Mrs. Bennet filled her in on the household routines, speaking quickly and efficiently. The ranch hands came in just as the food was ready. Miguel was in his early 30s with kind eyes and a ready smile. His brother Carlos was about 20, gangly and shy. Dutch was grizzled and weathered, probably past 60, but his handshake was firm and his eyes were sharp. James came in last, his hair damp from washing at the pump. His eyes found Catherine immediately. "Did you sleep well?" "Very well, thank you." "Good. After breakfast, I will show you around the ranch so you know where everything is." Breakfast was a lively affair. The men talked and joked, teasing each other good-naturedly while putting away impressive amounts of food. Catherine sat quietly observing. This was nothing like the tension and fear she had lived with for the past weeks. This felt like family. After the men headed out to their work, Catherine helped Mrs. Bennet clean up. Then James took her on a tour of the property. He showed her the barn where they kept the horses, the chicken coop, the smokehouse, the root cellar. He introduced her to the ranch dogs, two mutts named Biscuit and Gravy, who immediately loved her. "The well water is clean," he explained, "but we keep drinking water in covered buckets in the house. The creek is about a quarter-mile that direction if you need to do laundry. Stay away from the bullpen. Old Brutus is mean as a rattlesnake." Catherine absorbed it all, asking questions when she needed clarification. James was patient with her, never making her feel stupid for not knowing ranch life. When they finally returned to the house, the morning was half gone, and Catherine felt like she was beginning to understand her new home. The days developed a pattern. Catherine would wake before dawn and help Mrs. Bennet prepare breakfast. After the men ate and left for their work, the women would tackle the day's tasks: laundry, mending, cleaning, preparing the midday meal. In the afternoons, while Mrs. Bennet rested her arthritic joints, Catherine would work on additional chores or tend the vegetable garden. Supper preparation began in the late afternoon, and after the evening meal was cleaned up, Catherine would have a few hours to herself before bed. It was hard work, harder than anything she had done in the seamstress shop. But it was honest work, and Catherine found satisfaction in it. More importantly, she felt safe for the first time in years. No debt collectors hammered on the door. No one looked at her with disdain or pity. She was simply Catherine, the hired help, earning her own way. James kept his distance at first, polite but not overly friendly. Catherine appreciated this. She needed time to adjust, to learn to trust again. But as the weeks passed, she found herself watching for him. The way he laughed at Dutch's terrible jokes, the way he was endlessly patient with the horses, the way he always thanked her and Mrs. Bennet for the meals, never taking their work for granted. One evening about a month after her arrival, Catherine was in the garden picking tomatoes when James approached. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. "Mind if I help?" he asked. "Not at all." They worked side by side in comfortable silence for a while. James had a good eye for ripe vegetables, and his basket filled quickly. "You have done well here," he said eventually. "Mrs. Bennet says she does not know how she managed without you." "She is being kind. Mrs. Bennet could run this ranch with one hand tied behind her back." James chuckled. "That is probably true, but you have made her life easier, and I appreciate that." He paused, pulling a particularly fat tomato from the vine. "How are you settling in, truly?" Catherine considered the question carefully. "I feel like I am waiting for something to go wrong," she admitted. "This is the first time I have felt secure since my mother died, and part of me does not trust it." "That is understandable," James said quietly. "But I meant what I said that first day. You are free here. You can leave whenever you want. You can stay as long as you want. No strings, no expectations beyond fair work for fair wages." "Why did you really buy my freedom?" Catherine asked, the question that had haunted her for weeks finally escaping. "The truth about your sister? That was real, I could see it. But there must have been others you could have helped. Why me?" James was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the darkening prairie. "I saw your face when you stood on that platform," he said finally. "You were terrified, but you were not broken. You kept your chin up, kept your dignity, even when they were treating you like property. It reminded me of Ellen. She had that same stubborn pride, that refusal to be defeated even when the world was crushing her." He turned to look at Catherine, his green eyes serious. "I could not save my sister, but I could save you. Maybe it was selfish in a way. Maybe I did it as much for myself as for you." "It was not selfish," Catherine said softly. "It was the most selfless thing anyone has ever done for me." Something shifted between them in that moment, subtle but significant. Catherine felt it in the way James looked at her, in the charged silence that stretched between them. Her heart beat faster, and she wondered if he could hear it. "I should get these inside," she said, suddenly flustered. "Mrs. Bennet needs them for supper." "Right," James said, clearing his throat. "Of course." They walked back to the house together, and Catherine could not shake the feeling that something important had just happened, though she could not quite name what it was. The summer heat intensified as July gave way to August. The work on the ranch grew harder as the cattle needed to be moved to fresh pasture and the hay needed harvesting. James and the ranch hands worked from dawn until well past dark, coming in exhausted and covered in dust. Catherine found herself looking for ways to make their lives easier. She made sure there was always cool water waiting for them. She prepared their favorite foods when supplies allowed. She mended their clothes and darned their socks. It was small things, but she could see the appreciation in their eyes. James especially seemed grateful for these small kindnesses. He started seeking her out in the evenings, sitting on the porch after supper to talk while the stars came out. He told her about growing up in Missouri, about learning the cattle business, about his dreams for the Double C. Catherine shared her own stories, talking about her mother and the seamstress shop, about growing up poor but happy until debt and death changed everything. "Do you miss it?" James asked one night. "The seamstress work?" "Sometimes," Catherine admitted. "I enjoyed creating beautiful things. There was satisfaction in taking fabric and thread and making something useful and pretty." She smiled ruefully. "But there is satisfaction in this work too, just a different kind." "You could still sew if you wanted," James said. "Mrs. Bennet has an old sewing machine in her room that she never uses anymore. Her hands shake too much now, but I bet she would let you use it if you asked." The thought excited Catherine more than she wanted to admit. "I would not want to impose." "You would not be imposing. Ask her tomorrow." So Catherine did, and Mrs. Bennet was delighted to hand over the sewing machine. "Lord knows it is just gathering dust," the older woman said. "Put it to good use, girl." Catherine set up the machine in her small room and began sewing in the evenings after her chores were done. She started with practical items, making new curtains for the kitchen and pillowcases for the beds. But then she grew more ambitious, creating a beautiful quilt from fabric scraps, the colors blending together like a prairie sunset. James noticed the quilt one evening when he came in for supper. "Did you make that?" Catherine nodded, suddenly shy. "I thought the sitting room needed some color." "It is beautiful," he said, running his hand over the careful stitching. "You are very talented." The praise warmed her more than it should have. Catherine was beginning to realize that her feelings for James were growing beyond gratitude and respect. She looked forward to their evening talks. She noticed how the lamplight caught the gold in his hair. She paid attention when he smiled, memorizing the way his whole face changed, becoming younger and more carefree. She was falling in love with him, and the realization terrified her. Catherine had never been in love before. Her life had not allowed for such luxuries, but she recognized the signs. The way her heart raced when he entered a room, the way she found excuses to be near him, the way she lay awake at night thinking about him. It was wonderful and awful all at once. The problem was she had no idea how James felt. He was kind to her, yes, but he was kind to everyone. He sought out her company, but maybe he was just being friendly. She was too afraid to hope for more, too afraid to risk the security and peace she had finally found. September arrived with cooler temperatures and brilliant blue skies. The ranch prepared for the fall cattle drive that would take them to the railhead in Wichita. James would be gone for nearly 3 weeks, and Catherine found herself dreading his departure. The night before he left, James found her on the porch, watching the sunset. "Will you be all right while I'm gone?" he asked us, being "Of course," Catherine said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "Mrs. Bennet and I will manage fine." "Dutch is staying behind to watch over things, E.T.," James said. "If you need anything at all, you tell him and he will handle it." "We will be fine," Catherine repeated. Then, gathering her courage, she added, "Be safe." James looked at her, and Catherine saw something flicker in his eyes, something that made her breath catch. "I will," he promised. "I have something to come back to now." He left before she could respond, and Catherine sat on the porch long after the sun went down, wondering what he meant by that. The 3 weeks James was gone felt like 3 months. Catherine threw herself into her work, but everything felt duller without his presence. Mrs. Bennet noticed her moping and called her on it one afternoon while they were canning vegetables. "You are in love with him," the older woman said bluntly. Catherine nearly dropped the jar she was holding. "What? No, I am just—" Do not try to fool me, girl. I have eyes. You watch him like he hung the moon. Question is, are you going to do anything about it? I cannot, Catherine said miserably. He saved me from being sold like cattle. I owe him everything. I cannot burden him with my feelings. Burden him? Mrs. Bennet snorted. Child, that man is just as moon-eyed over you. He is just too honorable to say anything because he does not want you to feel obligated to him. Catherine's heart leaped. You think he has feelings for me? I do not think, I know. The man watches you just as much as you watch him, but you are both too stubborn and scared to do anything about it. Mrs. Bennet fixed her with a stern look. When he gets back, you need to be honest with him. Life is too short for this kind of foolishness. Catherine wanted to believe it, but fear held her back. What if Mrs. Bennet was wrong? What if James only saw her as an employee, someone he had helped out of charity? She could not bear the thought of ruining what they had. James returned on a cloudy afternoon in late September. Catherine was in the kitchen making bread when she heard the cattle lowing and the shouts of the cowboys, and she abandoned her dough and ran outside, not caring that she was covered in flour. James was dismounting from Tucker, looking tired and trail-worn, but healthy. His face lit up when he saw her running toward him, and before Catherine could think better of it, she threw her arms around him. You're back, she said into his dusty shirt. James seemed startled for a moment. Then his arms came around her, holding her close. I'm back, he confirmed, his voice rough. Did you miss me? Catherine pulled back just enough to look up at him. His green eyes were warm and full of something she did not dare name. Yes, she admitted. I missed you very much. Good, James said softly, and because I missed you too. Every day I was gone, I thought about coming home to you. Catherine's breath caught. James. I know I should not say this, he interrupted, his hands still resting on her waist. I know you might feel obligated to me because of what I did, but I cannot keep pretending anymore, Catherine. I have fallen in love with you, completely, hopelessly in love. And if you do not feel the same way, I will respect that and we will go on as we have been. But I had to tell you, I had to be honest. Joy exploded in Catherine's chest, so fierce and bright it nearly overwhelmed her. You love me? With everything I have, James said simply. I love you too, Catherine whispered. I have been so afraid to say it, so afraid of ruining everything, but I love you, James. Not because you saved me, but because of who you are, because you are kind and good and you make me feel safe, because you see me as a person, not as property or charity, because when I am with you, I feel like I am home. James smiled, that brilliant smile that transformed his whole face. Can I kiss you? Please, Catherine said. He leaned down and pressed his lips to hers, gentle and tentative at first, then deeper as Catherine responded. She had never been kissed before, and the sensation overwhelmed her senses. James tasted like coffee and trail dust and hope. His hands cupped her face like she was something precious, and Catherine pressed closer, wanting to eliminate every inch of space between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Catherine saw Miguel and Carlos grinning at them from beside the barn. Mrs. Bennet stood on the porch, arms crossed and looking smug. About damn time, the older woman called out. James laughed, his forehead resting against Catherine's. I suppose we have an audience. I do not care, Catherine said, and she meant it. Let the whole world watch. She had spent so long feeling ashamed and afraid, always trying to hide. But this love she felt for James was something worth proclaiming. The next weeks were the happiest of Catherine's life. She and James courted properly, despite the fact that they lived under the same roof. He took her on picnics by the creek. They rode out to watch the sunset over the prairie. He brought her wildflowers and she baked him pies. It was sweet and tender and everything Catherine had never allowed herself to dream of. James proposed on a crisp October evening, the leaves on the cottonwood trees turning gold. They were sitting on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the chill, when he took her hand. I know we have not been courting long, he said, but I am sure of my feelings, Catherine. I want to spend my life with you. I want to build this ranch together. I want children and grandchildren and a lifetime of evenings just like this one." He pulled a simple gold band from his pocket. "Will you marry me? Not because I bought your freedom, but because we chose each other?" "Yes," Catherine said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." He slipped the ring on her finger, and it fit perfectly. They were married a month later in the small church in Dodge City. Mrs. Bennett stood up as Catherine's witness, and Miguel stood up for James. It was a simple ceremony, but Catherine could not have imagined anything more perfect. The wedding night was tender and passionate. James careful and patient with Catherine's inexperience. He whispered his love against her skin, and Catherine learned that her body was capable of joy she had never imagined. They loved each other through the night, and when Catherine finally fell asleep in her husband's arms, she felt completely, utterly whole. Life settled into a new rhythm. Catherine was no longer the hired help, but the mistress of the Double C. She worked alongside Mrs. Bennett still, but now she made decisions about the household. She and James discussed ranch business over breakfast, their partnership extending to every aspect of their lives. The ranch hands treated her with respect, and Catherine felt like she had finally found where she belonged. The winter was harsh that year, with snow drifting high against the barn, but the ranch house was warm and cozy, and Catherine spent the long evening sewing and reading while James carved wood by the fire. They talked and laughed and made love, building a foundation of intimacy and trust. In March, Catherine realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with equal parts joy and terror. She had seen women die in childbirth, seen children lost to fever and disease. But when she told James, his face lit up with such pure happiness that her fears began to ease. "We are going to be parents, Edouard," he said, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "Our child, Catherine. Part you, part me." "Are you hoping for a boy?" she asked. "I do not care," James said honestly. "Healthy is all that matters. Boy or girl, we will love them with everything we have." The pregnancy was not easy. Catherine suffered from morning sickness that lasted well into the afternoon. Her back ached and her ankles swelled, but James was endlessly patient, rubbing her feet in the evenings and never complaining when she snapped at him from exhaustion. Mrs. Bennett was thrilled about the baby, already knitting tiny clothes and planning the nursery. The ranch hands treated Catherine like she was made of glass, refusing to let her do any heavy work. Catherine protested, but secretly she was touched by their concern. As summer arrived and Catherine's belly grew round, she found herself reflecting on how far she had come. A year ago she had stood on an auction block, terrified and alone. Now she was married to a man she loved deeply, expecting their first child surrounded by people who cared for her. It felt like a miracle. The baby came in early November, arriving during an early snowstorm. The labor was long and painful, and there were moments when Catherine was certain she would die. But Mrs. Bennett, who had delivered many babies in her time, remained calm and confident. James stayed with Catherine the whole time, holding her hand and whispering encouragement, refusing to leave despite the older woman's insistence that childbirth was no place for a man. When the baby finally arrived, his cries filling the room, Catherine wept with relief and joy. James cut the cord with shaking hands, and Mrs. Bennett placed the tiny, squirming bundle on Catherine's chest. "A boy," Mrs. Bennett announced, "healthy and strong." Catherine looked down at her son, at his tiny, perfect fingers and his shock of dark hair, and felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. James leaned over them both, tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," James whispered. "You are perfect. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you for this gift." They named him Thomas, after Catherine's father, before the drink destroyed him, reclaiming the name with love and hope. Baby Thomas was colicky and demanding, but Catherine did not mind the sleepless nights. Every moment with her son felt precious. James was a devoted father, walking the floor with Thomas when he cried, changing diapers without complaint, singing off-key lullabies. Catherine would watch her husband with their son and fall in love with him all over again. The ranch continued to prosper. With the money from good cattle sales, James hired more hands and expanded the herd. He built additions onto the house, creating a proper nursery for Thomas and a private sitting room for Catherine. The Double C was becoming one of the most successful ranches in the region, and Catherine took pride in their accomplishments. When Thomas was 2 years old, Catherine discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and she delivered a healthy baby girl in the spring of 1882. They named her Ellen, after James's sister, and the name felt like a blessing, a way of honoring the woman whose tragedy had led to Catherine's salvation. Ellen was a calm baby, completely unlike her brother. She nursed easily and slept through the night by 3 months old. Thomas adored his little sister, always wanting to help care for her. The house rang with children's laughter, and Catherine marveled at how full her life had become. Mrs. Bennett, now in her 60s, gradually retired from most household duties. She spent her days watching the children and directing Catherine rather than doing the heavy work herself. Catherine hired a young woman from town named Sarah to help with the cooking and cleaning, remembering how overwhelmed she had been in those early days. James and Catherine's love deepened with each passing year. They had their disagreements, of course. James could be stubborn about ranch decisions, and Catherine had a temper when pushed too far. But they had learned to talk through their problems, to listen to each other, to compromise. Their partnership was built on respect and trust, and that foundation held firm through good times and bad. When Thomas was 6 and Ellen was 4, Catherine became pregnant for a third time. She was older now, 30 years old, and the pregnancy took a harder toll on her body. James worried constantly, hovering over her until Catherine had to shoo him away. "I am not made of china," she insisted. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." "Not my wife," James said stubbornly. "You are precious cargo, Catherine Cordell, and I will treat you as such." This baby, another boy, was born in the winter of 1884. They named him Michael, and he had Catherine's brown hair and James's green eyes. With 3 children under the age of 7, the house was chaotic and loud and absolutely perfect. The years passed in a blur of ranch work and child rearing. Thomas grew tall and serious, taking after his father in temperament. Ellen was spirited and curious, always asking questions and getting into mischief. Michael was the peacemaker, able to charm his way out of any trouble. Catherine taught the children to read and write using the education her mother had given her. James taught them about ranching, letting them help with age-appropriate tasks. They grew up understanding the value of hard work and the importance of family. In 1888, Mrs. Bennett passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 71. The whole family mourned her, remembering her gruff kindness and unwavering loyalty. Catherine had lost her mother twice, first her blood mother and then the woman who had become a second mother to her. But she took comfort in knowing that Mrs. Bennett had lived to see Catherine happy and successful, that the older woman had died knowing she was loved. The ranch continued to grow. James purchased adjacent land, expanding the Double C into one of the largest spreads in Kansas. He took on a partner, Miguel, who had been with him from the beginning. Together they made smart decisions, weathering droughts and market downturns, always moving forward. Catherine continued her sewing, now making clothes not just for her family but selling her creations in town. She discovered she had a talent for design, and soon women were requesting her work specifically. The extra income was not necessary, but Catherine enjoyed the creative outlet and the independence it provided. As the children grew older, they began to show their individual personalities and talents. Thomas, at 16, was already helping manage the ranch, showing a natural aptitude for business. Ellen, at 14, had inherited her mother's skill with a needle and was already creating beautiful embroidery. Michael, at 12, was the best horseman of the 3, able to gentle even the most stubborn mount. Catherine and James watched their children grow with pride and occasional heartache. The years had passed so quickly. Catherine was approaching 40 now, her brown hair showing threads of silver. James was nearing 50, his temples gray and his face lined from years of sun and wind. But when he looked at her, Catherine saw the same love she had seen on their wedding day. One evening in the summer of 1892, Catherine and James sat on the porch watching the sunset, just as they had done countless times over the years. The children were inside arguing good-naturedly over a card game. The ranch stretched out around them, prosperous and peaceful. "Do you ever think about that day in Dodge City?" James asked. "The day I bought your freedom?" "Sometimes," Catherine admitted. "It feels like a lifetime ago, like it happened to a different person." "In some ways it did," James said. "You are not the same terrified girl who stood on that platform, and I am not the same cowboy who thought he was just righting an old wrong." "What are you now?" Catherine asked, curious. James took her hand, the simple gesture still sending warmth through her after all these years. "I am a man who loves his wife more than life itself, a father who is proud of his children, a rancher who has built something lasting. But most of all, I am the luckiest man alive, because you chose to love me back." Catherine leaned her head on his shoulder, content. "I was the one who got lucky. You gave me everything, James. Freedom, love, family, home. You gave me a life worth living." "We gave each other those things," James corrected. "This life, this ranch, this family, we built it together." He was right, Catherine knew. Their life had not been easy, but it had been good. They had faced hardships and heartaches, joys and triumphs. They had raised children and built a legacy, and they had loved each other through it all. As the sun sank below the horizon and the stars began to emerge, Catherine felt a deep sense of peace. She had been sold like property, treated as less than human. But one man's kindness had changed everything. James had bought her freedom and asked nothing in return. And in doing so, he had given her the greatest gift possible, the chance to choose her own destiny. And she had chosen him over and over again every day for 14 years. She would continue choosing him for as long as they both lived. Inside the house, their children's laughter rang out. The ranch dogs barked at something in the distance. The cicadas sang their evening song. It was an ordinary moment, unremarkable in most ways. But to Catherine, it was everything. Years continued to flow like the Kansas wind across the prairie. Thomas married a school teacher from Dodge City in 1895, bringing his bride Sarah to live on the Double C. James helped them build a house on the eastern portion of the property, keeping the family close but giving the young couple privacy. Catherine watched her eldest son exchange vows and remembered her own wedding day, the joy and hope that had filled her heart. Ellen, true to her independent spirit, announced at 18 that she wanted to open a dress shop in Dodge City. James was hesitant, worried about his daughter living alone in town, but Catherine supported her. "She has my skill and your business sense," Catherine told her husband Asit. "She will be fine." Ellen's shop thrived, her designs drawing customers from surrounding towns. She lived above the shop with a respectable widow who served as her chaperone, and she came home every Sunday for family dinner. At 20, she met a banker named Robert Thornton, a kind man with progressive ideas who respected her ambition. They married in the spring of 1898, and Ellen continued running her shop even after the wedding, something almost unheard of for married women. Michael, the youngest, remained at home the longest. He had a gift with horses that drew attention from across the territory. By the time he was 18, he was training horses for wealthy buyers, earning a reputation for his patient, gentle methods. He married the daughter of a neighboring rancher when he was 22, a spirited girl named Lucy who could ride as well as any man. Catherine and James became grandparents 5 times over, their house frequently filled with the noise and chaos of visiting grandchildren. Thomas and Sarah had 3 boys. Ellen and Robert had twin girls. Michael and Lucy welcomed a son and another on the way. The turn of the century brought changes to the West. Dodge City was no longer the wild frontier town Catherine remembered from her youth. Telephones and electricity were coming. Automobiles occasionally appeared on the streets, frightening the horses. The open range was increasingly fenced and divided. The world was modernizing, and while Catherine appreciated some improvements, part of her mourned the passing of the old ways. James felt it too. "We lived through the tail end of something," he said one evening in 1902. They were both in their 50s now, still active but feeling the aches and pains of age. "The West, the way it was when we met, that is disappearing." "But we have this Catherine said, gesturing to their home, their land, their family. "We built something that will last. Our children and grandchildren will remember. The double C will endure." And it did endure. Thomas took over more of the daily ranch operations as James aged, learning from his father's wisdom while bringing new ideas of his own. The ranch adapted to changing times, implementing modern ranching techniques while maintaining the core values James had established: fair treatment of workers, good stewardship of the land, quality over quantity. In 1905, on their 24th wedding anniversary, James took Catherine back to Dodge City. They walked through the town square, and Catherine stood in the spot where the auction platform had once been. It was gone now, replaced by a small park with benches and flowers. "What are you thinking?" James asked. "I'm thinking about that terrified girl who stood here," Catherine said. "She could never have imagined this life. She could never have imagined being this happy." James put his arm around her waist. "Do you have any regrets?" Catherine considered the question seriously. Their life had not been perfect. They had lost children in the womb between Michael and several miscarriages after. They had endured droughts that killed cattle and winters that froze pipes. They had argued and struggled and cried, but through it all, they had loved each other. "Not a single one," she said finally. "Every joy, every heartache, every moment led me to you and to our family. I would not change anything." That night, lying in bed in a hotel room, Catherine and James made love with the passion of newlyweds and the tenderness of long familiarity. They knew each other's bodies as well as their own, understood what pleased and comforted. Their physical relationship had evolved over the years but had never diminished. If anything, it had deepened, becoming more meaningful as it became intertwined with their shared history. "I love you," James murmured against her neck, "more now than ever." "And I love you," Catherine responded, running her fingers through his gray hair. "My rescuer, my partner, my heart." The years between 1905 and 1915 brought both joy and sorrow. Dutch passed away in 1907, his heart simply giving out one morning. Miguel retired with a generous pension, moving to town with his wife. New ranch hands came and went, but none had quite the same connection to the family as those original men who had welcomed Catherine so many years ago. The grandchildren grew, some staying close to home, others venturing out to seek their fortunes elsewhere. Thomas and Sarah's eldest went to college in the East, something that would have been unthinkable in Catherine's youth. Ellen's twins became teachers. Michael's sons showed early signs of inheriting their father's gift with horses. Catherine continued sewing well into her 60s, her eyes still sharp enough for the detailed work she loved. She taught her granddaughters the craft, passing down skills and techniques her mother had taught her. The connection across generations pleased her deeply. James remained active on the ranch until a fall from a horse in 1912 left him with a badly broken leg. He recovered, but he walked with a cane after that and had to accept that his body could no longer do everything his mind wanted. Thomas ran the day-to-day operations while James served as an advisor, his years of experience still valuable. In the spring of 1916, Catherine and James celebrated their 35th wedding anniversary surrounded by their children, their children's spouses, and a dozen grandchildren ranging from infancy to young adulthood. They held the celebration at the Double C with tables set up under the cottonwood trees and enough food to feed a small army. Thomas stood to give a toast. "My parents have shown us what love looks like," he said, his voice thick with emotion. They built this ranch with hard work and determination. They raised us with love and discipline. They have been partners in every sense of the word. Dad, Mom, thank you for the example you have set. Thank you for creating a legacy worth preserving." Everyone raised their glasses, and Catherine had to wipe tears from her eyes. She looked around at all these people, this family that had grown from the love between her and James, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. That night, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Catherine and James walked slowly to the creek, James leaning on his cane. They sat on the bank listening to the water flow and the night birds call. "We did well," James said softly. "Did we not?" "We did better than well," Catherine replied. "We did magnificently." "I want you to know something," James said, turning to face her. The moonlight silvered his hair and highlighted the lines on his face, lines that Catherine thought made him more handsome, not less. "That day I bought your freedom, I told you I did it for Ellen. That was true, but it was not the whole truth." "What do you mean?" Catherine asked. "The moment I saw you on that platform, something in my heart recognized you. I did not understand it then. I told myself I was righting a wrong, honoring my sister's memory, but looking back, I think I knew even then that you were meant to be mine, that we were meant to find each other." He took her hand, his thumb stroking the ring he had placed there 35 years ago. "I bought your freedom because it was the right thing to do, but I think fate put me in that town square on that specific day because we were supposed to meet, because our story was supposed to happen." Catherine leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. "I believe that too. I think every terrible thing that happened to me, all the loss and pain and fear, it led me to you. And if I had to go through it all again to end up here, I would do it without hesitation." They sat by the creek until the moon was high overhead, two old people who had loved each other through everything life threw at them. When James finally helped Catherine to her feet and they walked slowly back to the house, they moved as one, their steps synchronized after decades of walking together. The war in Europe seemed distant from their Kansas ranch, but it still touched them. Ellen's husband Robert enlisted in 1917 despite being over 40, driven by patriotic duty. Ellen was terrified, but she held her head high and kept her shop running, writing letters to Robert every single day. Catherine recognized that strength, that refusal to break under pressure. Her daughter had inherited the best parts of her. Thomas wanted to enlist too, but James talked him out of it. "You have a wife and 3 sons," James said. "The ranch needs you. Your family needs you. Let the younger men go." It was one of the few times Catherine saw her husband pull rank as a father, insisting rather than suggesting. Michael's oldest son, just 18, did enlist. Catherine held her grandson close before he left, remembering when she had held him as a baby. "Come home safe," she whispered. "Promise me you will come home." He promised, and miraculously, he kept that promise. Both Robert and Catherine's grandson returned in 1919, changed by what they had seen, but alive and whole. The family celebrated their return with the same gratitude they had celebrated everything else, together. As the 1920s began, Catherine and James were both in their 60s, content to let their children run things while they enjoyed a well-earned rest. They spent their days quietly, reading and talking and simply being together. Catherine still sewed, though her fingers were not as nimble. James still walked the ranch every morning, though he moved slowly and needed his cane. "Do you remember our first conversation?" James asked one afternoon. They were sitting on the porch watching storm clouds gather on the horizon. "That first day at the ranch?" "You asked if I could cook," Catherine said, smiling at the memory, "and if I slept well." "I was so nervous," James admitted. "I wanted to help you, but I did not want to make you uncomfortable. You look so fragile, but so strong at the same time." "I was terrified of you at first," Catherine confessed. "Not because you were scary, but because I could not understand why you would help me. I kept waiting for you to demand repayment. And I kept trying to prove that I wanted nothing from you," James said. "We were quite the pair. "We still are," Catherine said, taking his hand. "The best pair there ever was." The next years were gentle and slow, a gradual winding down. Catherine's health remained relatively good, though arthritis made sewing difficult. James's heart was weak, and he tired easily. But they had each other, and they had a family that visited often, and that was enough. In the summer of 1925, the Double C held a massive celebration for James's 70th birthday. All three children came with their spouses and children. The grandchildren now numbered 15, ranging from toddlers to young adults with children of their own. Catherine was a great-grandmother 3 times over, a fact that astonished her. As she watched her family laugh and play, spanning 4 generations, Catherine thought about that girl on the auction block, that frightened, desperate girl who had thought her life was over. She wished she could go back and tell her younger self, "Hold on. Hold on, because something wonderful is coming. Because a man with green eyes and a kind heart is going to save you, and you are going to save him right back. And together you will build something beautiful." James found her standing apart from the celebration, tears streaming down her face. "What is wrong, my love?" "Nothing is wrong," Catherine said. "Everything is so right, it overwhelms me. Look at all of this, James. Look at what we created." James wrapped his arms around her, and they stood together watching their legacy play out before them. "We did good," he said simply. "We did better than good," Catherine corrected. "We did extraordinary." That fall, James suffered a heart attack. He survived, but it weakened him significantly. The doctor was honest. There would likely be another, and next time James might not be so lucky. Catherine refused to leave his side, sleeping in a chair beside their bed, holding his hand through the nights. "I am not ready to lose you," she whispered one night when she thought he was asleep. "I am not ready to leave you," James responded, his voice weak but steady. "But Catherine, if I go first, you cannot follow me too quickly. Our family still needs you." "I do not want to be here without you," Catherine said, the tears coming freely now. "I know," James said, squeezing her hand with what little strength he had, "but you are the strongest person I have ever known. You will survive. You will continue. And when it is your time, I will be waiting. I promise you that. I will be waiting, and we will be together again." James lived through the winter, defying the doctor's expectations. He rallied in the spring, well enough to sit on the porch and watch the ranch operate around him. Catherine read to him in the afternoons, and they talked about their life together, remembering the good times and laughing about the hard times that seemed humorous in retrospect. On a warm May evening in 1926, surrounded by his wife and children, James Cordell passed away peacefully in his sleep. He was 70 years old, and he had lived a good, full life. Catherine grieved deeply but did not break. She remembered her promise to James, her promise to stay strong for their family. She wore black for a year and visited his grave every week, talking to him as if he could hear her. Maybe he could. Catherine chose to believe he could. She lived 3 more years. Years filled with her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She finished one last quilt, the most elaborate she had ever made, depicting scenes from her life with James. The auction block, their wedding, the ranch, their children. It was her masterpiece, and when it was done, she knew she had completed what she needed to complete. Catherine died in her sleep on a cool October night in 1929. Just 2 weeks before what would have been her 48th wedding anniversary. She was 73 years old. Her family found her with a smile on her face, and when they prepared her for burial, they dressed her in her wedding dress, carefully preserved all these years. They buried her beside James on a hill overlooking the Double C, under a cottonwood tree they had planted together on their 5th anniversary. The headstone was simple: Catherine Moore Cordell, beloved wife, mother, grandmother. Beneath it read, "She was bought but never owned. She was freed and chose love." The Double C continued for generations, run by Thomas's descendants and then his children's descendants, The ranch house remained largely unchanged, a testament to the couple who had built it. Catherine's quilts hung on the walls, her sewing machine sat in a place of honor. James's saddle stayed in the barn, carefully maintained, and every generation heard the story of how it all began, with a terrified girl on an auction block and a cowboy who bought her freedom and asked nothing in return. They heard about how love grew from that act of kindness, how a family was built on a foundation of respect and partnership. They learned that the best legacies are not measured in acres or cattle or money, but in the love we give and the lives we touch. Catherine and James's story became the foundation upon which everything else was built. It was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, kindness matters, that one person's compassion can change everything. That love, real love, is always a choice, freely given and freely returned. And on quiet evenings when the wind blew across the Kansas prairie, some swore they could see two figures walking hand in hand toward the creek, an old cowboy and his beloved wife. Together again as they had always been meant to be, their love story endless as the land itself.